Hello, I'm Roland. I'm with Midstage Institute, and thank you so much for joining this LinkedIn Live today. We will be talking today about how to 10x your startup velocity, a really interesting topic that I know many of you are excited to hear about. So let's make sure all the technology is in order. If you can hear me really well, then please put this in the chat so that we can all see who is participating. And also, I'd love to hear where you're dialing in from in the world. So I've heard of people from San Francisco, New York, London, maybe even some time zone stragglers from Asia. So please put this in the chat. I would love to hear that. And finally, point of order before we get started, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. Make sure that you capture this QR code and that you are actually connected, not just following, because LinkedIn is where we publish all of our new content for founders and tech CEOs like you. So this is going to be the most important source of getting new tools and insights for your business. All right, cool. So 10xing your startup velocity. We have about 20-30 minutes here, so I'm going to give you as much as I can, but obviously there's going to be some stuff left. So at the end, I will tell you how to get more. For example, our signature book on scaling Silicon Valley style, but also other things like decision tools, video course, community, and other things. So stay until the end for that. First, what is your most important question about startup speed, or actually startup slowness, if that's what you're experiencing in your business? Please put this in the chat as well, and then we'll be able to answer those questions either during the webinar or as we get into the Q&A at the end. Who is this really meant for? Well, our core target group here for this content is tech startups between 2 and 20 million ARR and between 10 to 200 people. Out of these, we typically talk to founders and CEOs who primarily just want results faster. We also have co-founders and CTOs typically on these webinars who are often worried about, is the startup still adhering to its vision? And then, of course, the hired guns, the hired startup executives who just often want to be more professional with their teams. And the question is, how do you reconcile all this and get people to move into the same direction, all delivering results together? Often this does not come that naturally. People often feel like they're pushing harder, but actually in a way spinning in cycles. And this is a pattern that we see all the time. So I'm going to give you some examples here of what people experience. I'm not reading through all of them, but ever-changing priorities, execution lagging behind the intentions, silos not talking to each other. I'm sure you recognize many of these symptoms that we've seen throughout companies. But it's not your fault. What is at fault is often the wrong system of how you run your startup. So a bad system, as Sam Friedman says, will beat a good person every time. And it's also not your fault because in a way you've been lied to about cracking the startup code. It's a common myth in the whole startup and VC world that it's all about manic hustle, especially in the early stage. And in the early stage, it actually works. But as your startup grows beyond the 1-2 million ARR, the 10-20 people, then that pure manic hustle basically stops working. We all know this founder who believes that if you just push harder, you will become a unicorn, right? And I'm sure you recognize many of the sayings here, maybe even from yourself. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you can also feel how cringy it comes across if the founder keeps pushing and pushing and pushing and it's not actually leading to more results for the startup, right? So the reason why that is because they push typically on the end results that are disappointing, right? So we want more sales targets to be reached. We want faster product releases. We want to hire more talent all at the same time. And we want, of course, raise more funding. This is often where startups fall short, but you cannot directly address those like lagging metrics. What you have to address are the things that are causing these things to underperform, right? Constantly shifting decisions, a way of managing your team that's completely ad hoc and scattered task assignments where nobody can see the wood through the trees, or downplaying resource and time needs when people need some time to get things done, right? So manic hustle in that sense scales not beyond the 10, 20 people that we mentioned. People passing on the round, missing sales targets again, crucial product release delayed. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you get the picture. So the question is, why does manic hustle not scale? I want to share one theoretical insight with people that is really important to understand, because that'll help you see why the old way of operating your startup will no longer work as you grow a little bit further. Okay, let's go into this. It's a key insight from complexity theory or chaos theory, primarily developed by Norman Packard in the 1980s. And he looks at a startup as just one example of a complex system. Now, a complex system is characterized by a balance between chaos on the left hand and rigidity on the right hand. And then the results that the complex system generates are often in that what they call the edge of chaos. It's at the right balance between chaos and rigidity. Chaos defined as things like constant pivoting, unexpected decisions, many ideas but few results, you get it. Rigidity is more like your traditional organization, where it's actually tight control, there's the right processes that cannot, right and rigid processes cannot be questioned, and lack of innovation. Both sides are really not leading to results. What's leading to results? The right balance between it, which Norman Packard calls the edge of chaos, right? So to an openness to debate and to changing opinions, but also a way to disagree and commit about things once the debate is over. And then data-driven learning, where it's not the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion that marks the day, but actually science and data that says, this data is actually showing what we should do better, and this is the decision that we should take. So in a chaotic scale-up, if you are already like below average results, as you see in the circle on the right, then pushing harder, introducing more chaos, questioning more decisions, undermining process, all leads you away from that edge of chaos, away from the result zone, and makes things worse. And this is what we see all the time, why a startup still driven by manic hustle at that stage will simply not do very well. Of course, the opposite is the way to really go, right? So instead of adding more chaos, why don't you add a little bit more foundation, a little bit more clarity, so that people can start building on that, and you start seeing actual results explode, because now people have that stability to actually build on. And this is how we develop this velocity system. So we help people move away from that chaos zone of manic hustle into the velocity zone, which is just enough foundation, but not too much rigidity to land in that stagnant zone, right? So it's ARR growth, it's efficiency, it's collaboration and innovation that all characterize the velocity way of thinking. And I also want to say that, as a founder, you know so much, and you and your team probably already have all the answers. It's not your fault. Your fault is, or the fault of the manic hustle myth, to be clear, is that you may be answering the wrong questions with those answers. And that's where you often need a little bit of wisdom from the outside, right? So instead of asking, why is my team constantly pulling me back into the weeds, we often encourage founders to try asking themselves, how can I make clear upfront what good looks like, so that I don't have to be pulled back into the weeds all the time? People already know what my expectations are. Higher level than that even is, instead of asking why are people building silos that are constantly in conflict with each other, why do I have to be the referee or the umpire all the time? Try asking yourself, can I set cross-functional goals? Cross-functional goals that would drive alignment and results automatically, instead of me giving goals per function and then kind of setting them up for a competitive situation. And another one, number 3, is instead of asking, how do I get people to deliver the things that I know are needed? Why does it have to be you that decides what is needed? How do you hold your team accountable for company results so that they themselves can derive what is needed and you don't have to hold them accountable to all those individual tactical results? Many more questions where that came from, but it's just an example that you actually have all the answers already. What you may not have is the right questions to be asked. Now, this velocity system helps you reach that result zone in the middle, right? So again, ARR growth, efficiency, collaboration, and innovation. But I also want to state that this is not about turning into a boring corporation too quickly. We really think of it as a zone of 3, right? So you're no longer in that early startup mode, but you're also not going to be an incumbent. Just like an adolescent would not be very effective if they were trying to behave like a little child, but also not be very effective if they were trying to behave like a 50-year-old middle-aged guy, right? Adolescence in the human development is all about finding your own identity, trying many things out, sticking with some plans and giving up on others. This is really an apt metaphor for this phase of a startup life and going through this scale-up stage. And what that means is that the velocity acronyms that we use is really showing a very different behavior from both manic hustle and the stagnant situation. You recognize the acronym manic hustle here on the left. Again, I'm not reading through all the bullet points, but you'll recognize things like micromanagement, instability, the scrappy operations and so forth. You can read them right there. We want to change this mindset to a velocity mindset that goes around vision realization, discipline breakdown of the vision into what needs to be done when, exponential thinking, lightning fast iteration, ownership and openness for it, customer obsession, intense pressure and accountability, talent chemistry or talent everywhere, and then youthful exuberance or youthful enthusiasm. Very different from this stagnant situation. Again, I'm not reading through all of that, but where you see in a big corporation typically a lot of age cynicism, glacial processes and talent mediocrity. That's not what you want to strive for. So what does this Silicon Valley velocity system actually look like? Let me give you a quick overview. So first of all, it's about 4 pillars of transformation, right? So we want to help startups move from floundering to focus, from confusion to clarity, from helplessness to ownership, and from friction to flow. Those are the 4 pillars in which you see a true transformation taking place and getting from that haphazard early stage startup live to a really performing, a high performing scale up that can deal with this massive growth. And the tools we use for that are in a matrix of 6 blocks. So it starts with actually being clear and defined about the choices you make in a strategy, not trying to be everything to everyone, but really be very clear. And then the very core of it is the flywheel, which means you're building a business system, not just a product. Out of that come competences you need to build up, accountability for your people, as well as building capacity for your teams. And all of these together lead to investable metrics that investors immediately recognize and see how attractive that you are. So going through these in a little bit more detail quite fast. The core strategic choices are all about from running after shiny objects to focusing on the proven success factors for your business model, pulling that all together. The flywheel is the actual core of the system, right? So it's moving from disconnected silos to repeatable end-to-end results. And what you see here is like we've really defined the way that departments interact with each other in terms of the outcome they deliver for the next department. So product and engineering delivers marketable features so that marketing can deliver demand and leads, so that sales can deliver contracts, so that customer success can deliver happy customers, so that finance can cash the bills and get cash flow, and so that HR and people can build more capacity, which then leads to more features, more demand, more contracts, more happy customers, more cash, and so forth and so forth. This is really the system that we want every scale up to build, as opposed to focusing just purely on silos like product and go to market. Okay, out of that, we then see the the competences building, because sometimes parts of that flywheel simply are not working yet or are really falling behind how the rest of the company is already churning. And so instead of having a whole laundry list of projects and what could we possibly all be doing, we actually build very deliberately stronger core competence that are all making that flywheel build faster. So if, for example, demand generation is the part that is missing or it is too low, then how do you break down a high ambition like industry leading demand generation into like, okay, we will need over time 2 funnels, but let's start with the first funnel, and then what does it actually take to build that first funnel? Maybe out of the budget spending, we first need to get down to content and so forth. You see the example right there. The fourth one is accountability, right? So as you hire more people, you have to make sure that people are also feeling accountable and held accountable to their end results. So typically we divide up the leadership team between people each responsible for one part of the flywheel, and we have them make weekly commitments as to what's the one thing you can be doing to actually get better at your objective this week. And these are of course samples, but what we want to see is that there's a pattern emerging, like this person may be actually taking action and then moving yellow or red things into the green, but that other person is actually not seeing a lot of action, and this is then a signal for you to drive further conversations with that person. Are they still the right fit or not, right? Capacity is, once you have accountable people, then how can you actually start ever improving the quality of the teams, not just the leadership team, but across the board, from A players to D players, right? So how do you get, actually the other way around, how do you get from ever more A players in your company, right? A players defined as people who both have a good cultural fit as well as high performance. And then out of the other groups, you can say, well, people with not so great performance yet, but that do have a good cultural fit, can we train them a bit more? C players are people with great performance, but a terrible culture fit, so maybe they need a stern talking to. And then D players, of course, are an easy option to free up their future. All this together then brings you to investable metrics. So from an almost plethora of key KPIs, how do you actually deliver the results that investors want to see? Again, you cannot target them directly, but you can be disciplined about the system underneath so that these metrics for investors automatically start occurring. ARR growth, Rule of 40, as well as ARR per employee. All these metrics should be attractive compared to all the other startups that companies could invest in. So we help change that whole mentality of your startup leadership team to a velocity mindset, right? We break down the vision, we drive experimental thinking, lightning fast iteration, openness and ownership, customer obsession, intense accountability, top talent everywhere, and that youthful enthusiasm. So it's really up to you as a founder, as a startup leader. Do you want to work the old way, managing everything yourself, chasing up folks all the time and getting that hamster wheel with really nothing to show? Or do you want to work in a new way, right? Everyone on one page, a weekly cadence, and compounding results where everyone is working together in the same direction. People feel this may be overwhelming at the start, but to be honest, like we've seen this be implemented really fast. If you can commit, you can create the first steps of velocity in just 13 weeks. And what we do is across the board of those 4 pillars, focus, clarity, ownership, and flow, we make sure there's one thing every month that we start tweaking or improving. And very quickly, these things start compounding and getting you to real velocity in no time. Offerings, very quickly, there's a whole range of offerings, all the way from do it yourself, which is essentially an online course, to do it with us, where you add some coaching, do it with you, where somebody from our side starts helping you implement things, or even do it for you, where we place a chief velocity officer on a fractional basis in your company to build this whole system so that the CEO and founder can work more on the market facing stuff and can just rely on velocity being implemented in the company. The best way to pick here, of course, is to get started with the strategy call. You've seen the link below already. So That is a good next step. Get the QR code, book a call with me or one of my colleagues right now, and we'll talk through the challenges of your startup and what it sounds like you should be focusing on next. Whether you then decide to work with the velocity system or not, you get those insights anyway, and they'll be immediately actionable for your team. What we have found though with founders who have implemented the Silicon Valley velocity system, they have started to build a lot more trust in their teams. They feel much more confident in their business, able to embrace their own zone of genius, so not that focused on things that they're not that great at. And of course, over time, they enjoy the freedom from the grind, which was often the main reason why they started the startup in the first place. Okay, so we will not have time to go through all the case studies in much detail. I'll leave you to reviewing these on your own. But in Redox's case, we helped them deal with this growing complexity and get them to market leadership. In InRule's case, they were stagnant and we turned them back into a velocity organization, attracting new investment. And with that, I would just ask, put in the chat what was most helpful today. What have you learned so far? And where can we build a bit more conversation on what you've learned? As you do that, I will already move to also telling you for the resources that you were waiting for, right? So how do you get the signature book for free? Just comment book in the chat if you want it, and we'll send it to you via DM. Other things you can put in the chat are replay, course, community, coach. I guess this is all pretty simple, and we'll follow up on all these requests and send that to you as well. Cool. Again, get started with a strategy call. This is the best way to actually discuss the challenges of your startup and get actionable insight right away. And with that, I think we can start moving into Q&A.
Hey, Roland, great overview. But did we lose Roland for a moment there?
I am here. Hey, how's it going, Doug?
It's going great. So we've got a number of questions that are coming in right now. So the first one, I don't have a location. We'll call this person T because their name starts with a T. They ask, as the founder of an angel round startup, I understand early stage ventures require incredible dedication. How would you distinguish at this stage between manic hustle and like genuine commitment? And where do you draw the line between the two?
Okay, so talking about manic hustle, I think in an early stage startup, actually manic hustle is in many ways a good thing. So I think in very early stages, and I'm imagining here a startup that has 5 to 10 people literally around the breakfast table, actually being on top of things, telling people what to do, checking in with them every day, maybe changing your mind every 2 days or so is often exactly what it needs to be successful in that early stage. Because I always make the analogy, you're like a little mouse scouring for food anywhere, and basically it's anywhere where you can find it that you should go hunt. It's only when you start finding a repeated source of food where every day when you go back there's more and more and more that you start getting into scaling mode. That's when you find product market fit, if you will. And that is when moving away from the chaos actually becomes more relevant, because in the early stages, painful to say maybe, but chaos is a good thing. Does that answer that question, you think?
I think it does. And I think it calls out in the angel round, you're not at the scaling mid-stage round yet. So the things that work at that level maybe aren't appropriate as you're scaling and have product market fit and are trying to create repeatable processes, but totally appropriate.
I think maybe just to add one thing to that, Doug, you and I have both experienced many founders, maybe even experienced ourselves, that founders typically desperately want to move to that next stage because the early stage is so painful. But we always caution people against faking till you make it, at least on that side. Do not try to scale before you have full product market fit, because all you do is just add a lot of cost and burden, and it'll lose your key competitive advantage, which is your agility.
100% makes sense. You got to pivot until you find that product market fit. And once you find that, then you double down. Is that
absolutely? Mm-hmm.
So here's an interesting one. We had a strong growing business where we were getting a lot of partnership fees from Google, Meta, and Microsoft. Those partnerships have expired. With those partnerships, small customers were very profitable, but without them, they're not. How do I balance maintaining revenue, but more importantly, reorient the team to larger enterprise customers across sales and support?
Yeah,
This
that
is
sounds
from
like a
Lisa
very
in New Jersey. Go ahead.
yes, exactly. It does sound like a relatively complex change in business model, but that's essentially what it is, right? So I always tell founders, what you're really building after you get some initial product market fit is a repeatable business system. And that incorporates different aspects, not only the product and the innovation, but also like where do you find your demand? How do you close on people and get them to pay? How do you keep them happy, and how do you turn that into repeatable business and get the resources into the business, right? So every flywheel is a little bit different, but overall there is that flywheel that you're building. I think in this case there was a big disruption in the flywheel because the system that works for them is no longer there, and that essentially means you have to go back into the earlier stages where you are redevising your flywheel and making sure that you repair the part that's, it sounds like, irretrievably broken. Very often it'll feel exactly like this, like that person is describing, where one thing is missing, but that has a compound effect on 2-3 other aspects of the flywheel that also need changing, because this is systems theory. You need to you cannot just change one part of a system and expect everything else to keep working like it was before.
Yeah, and I think the thing that stood out to me in that question is, how do I maintain revenue while reorienting the team? I think doing both is very hard, but maybe you can set up a smaller team to reorient, to experiment on the larger customers while most of the company focuses there. But I think
generally, whenever there needs to be an innovation next to an existing business, that's typically the best advice, where we say, okay, let the bulk of the business focus on the current business, but typically at relatively low levels of funding. So it's more like, keep it in motion, but do not overinvest. And then there's a smaller team with a bit more funding that would basically explore the new world, typically reporting directly to the CEO, not being impacted by all the processes that are running the other business. That's what we typically recommend.
Love it. Another question here is from a co-founder. So I worry that my contribution and my role in the company will diminish as the company grows. How do I set the company up for success with these internal fears of me losing control to new executives and the CEO?
Yeah, very common question, and it can feel excruciatingly painful as a co-founder. But it's your baby, and losing control of that baby is terrifying. And yet, I would say, really, the perspective that person gives is the right one. Like, how do I set the company up for success? That's your very first question you should answer. And, I'm not a parent myself. You are, Doug, but I think there's a lot of parallels here to be drawn with being a parent, where in the end, it's also about setting up your child for success. It's not about how much control do you keep over your kid, especially not as they grow up older and older. It's really, how do they find their own way in life and become successful at it, and how can you help them and protect them from dangers? And I think that's really the analogy I would draw here with a startup as well. It may be your baby, but it's still its own person, its own entity that'll grow up with its own character. Last point I want to make here is, like, every single person in the startup should feel that way, because as you grow, you're going to get more talent in, more brains in. It is only normal to give up your Lego blocks. If you don't want to give up your Lego blocks, then start a one-person company that you never want to grow and keep it a lifestyle business.
I think that's well said, and I just want to also give this person the feedback. I believe it's a person in Phoenix, Arizona. Don't know if it's a male or female, but that they're aware of their internal fears of losing control. So that's good. Step one, right? If you're aware of how you're feeling, you can then take proactive steps to let individual things go as you bring in people. But I would also just talk to your CEO a lot about the feelings and about what areas he or she wants you to focus on going forward, right? As it goes in and what your role is. And then I think it might be challenging, but I'm confident this person can navigate it.
Yeah, and in combination with what do you want to focus on, right? So especially as a co-founder, I would say you're usually not really under threat of being ousted out of the company altogether. Usually they'll find a place for you no matter what, right? So you actually have a big opportunity in finding the things you really do want to focus on. And I'm not sure if this person is a CTO. Often CTOs have this particular issue. One of the CTOs I worked with decided to really focus entirely on architecture, on developer marketing, and on keeping the vision of the company and the culture sane. Those three things were the things that he focused on, and he became really good at it. But all the rest, in terms of product roadmap, managing the developer team and all these things, he said, ultimately, I'm not actually very good at that, and I don't want to do it anymore.
Great example. Let's see here. We've got somebody from Austin saying, how many pivots are too many before you're in the spin cycle?
I'm sorry to laugh because it's also very painful to go through that. But I think ultimately it's a question of energy and confidence. Do you believe you can still make it work, or are you really losing so much steam that you'd rather crawl away in a hole and let the startup slowly die? I think it's usually startups don't run out of money, they don't run out of talent, they run out of steam or run out of life, right? And I think like if you've been pivoting so many times that you just don't believe new pivots are going to do it anymore, then it's better to acknowledge that. And either it's the whole team that's thinking that. In that case, you can typically just disband, maybe give investors back the money that was left, if any. And otherwise, if some people do believe in it and others don't, then maybe it's a time to consider a split.
Well, I think the other question I would say to add to that would be that I don't think it's about too many pivots. I think it's about too frequent of pivots. If you're pivoting every month, every quarter, and trying something new and it's working or it's not, and then you're learning, I would call that experimentation, not pivots. But if you're doing it every week or every day, then I can understand that spin cycle. What have you seen across the clients you worked with recently that are Roland?
Yeah, I would also question, are they real pivots in that case, right? So I think constant optimization and tweaking variables in order to get more successful, that's not pivoting. That's basically just the normal work of a startup getting better and better. I think a pivot truly is things like a subtly whole different offering, whole different target group, sometimes in combination. And usually I would see those fundamental pivots, 2, 3, maybe 4 in a row, as you say, every 6 months or a little bit longer. But if that's still not working, then typically the startup loses steam and confidence.
Very well said. So here's a founding CEO from Tel Aviv asking, is there a way to bottle founder energy and distribute it to the team? Or is that just called equity?
Well, I guess equity would have that function to try and get that energy out. I will, however, say that most founders will confide in me that they were never able to find the same energy in employees as they were able to find in themselves and their co-founders. I do think it's a fundamental choice whether people run their own company or whether they decide to go work for somebody else. And that's not to say that cannot change. Of course, many founders used to be employees before, and sometimes they turn back to being employees as well. But I do think it's only natural that an employee doesn't spend their entire 100-200% of their life's energy on somebody else's company, whereas a founder or co-founder, that's much more natural.
Totally. Well said. Let's see here. How do you maintain velocity when your startup's runway looks very tight?
Yeah.
That means they're running out of money.
Yeah, they are probably running out of money. And usually the answer is focus excruciatingly on your very core. So almost all startups, and this is a controversial take, in my mind, almost all startups are fundamentally profitable. That's not what it looks like in their accounts because they're always investing a lot in potential growth avenues for the future. And that's what makes them unprofitable. So if you are running out of money and your runway is getting very short, typically the thing to do is to cut radically in all the more speculative growth investments for the future. That means new products, that means new markets, typically new geographies, sometimes new segments. And it also often means in the parts of the sales force that are more around building pipeline than around just actually closing deals, especially with current customers. All of these things are painful and they will cut into your growth, of course, but you cannot afford that growth investment at this stage, right? So it is ultimately, it would lead to a slow death. I'm not going to deny that. But if all you need is to tie yourself over for another 3 to 6 months, maybe until the market opens back up or you have more access to investment, then it makes sense to slow down the startup that way, focus on what you have already. So existing customers in your existing core with an existing product that they're happy to pay for. That is where you get your positive cash flow. And then hopefully in the short-term future, there'll be a better day tomorrow.
The one thing I would add to that is I would take a careful look at your customer list because maybe some early large customers, in some cases with some of the clients I can think I work with, turn out to be not profitable and they have very high expectations. So I think, one of the things, if you are getting very tight on your runway, you may have to look at those large revenue customers who are not profitable and maybe are distractions and make some hard choices there to shrink revenue while increasing profitability at the same time, which, sounds counterintuitive, but have seen, while challenging, work very well for several customers we work with.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's, many startup founders only look at revenues. They never look at costs. And that makes sense in those very big, growth at all costs times. But at this time, when it's a little bit tougher out there, you have to look at costs as well. And just allocating the costs, as you say, sometimes one customer demands a lot and everyone would be better off if that customer was basically let go. To some degree, the same also goes for employees, right? So a very simple way to cut costs immediately is to get rid of the NC players in your company, the people who basically cost more energy and effort to keep in line than to have them perform and deliver something.
Right. Very well said. So look at your employees, look at your customers, and figure out where there's rooms to optimize to increase.
And all the growth opportunities, you just cannot afford them at that point in time. And so better to put them on ice or cut them all together until you can.
Totally makes sense. I almost think about in a hiking context, if you're out of food and water, you're going to hike slowly. You're not going to try and run an ultra marathon versus
right, exactly.
food and water available.
Or go hunt for new food or water. That's probably a bad idea, actually,
right.
In that case, right?
Exactly. Interesting question. And I'm hopeful. How do you know if your startup is scaling or just getting bigger and less manageable?
Oh, very simple in my mind. Is the revenue per employee going up?
Great answer. Right. So few of our clients look at that initially when we work with them, right? They see scaling revenue, they see these things, but they don't really look at, are we getting even just marginally more effective or maintaining the same efficiency over time, depending on your growth rate, right? If you're very, very high growth, maintaining is probably okay in the short term, would you say? Where would you draw that line, Roland? How fast would growth rates have to be to where you wouldn't want to be getting at least 5% more efficient year over year?
Yeah, so I mean, usually we use the rule of 40 for that, right? So together, the margin and the growth rate should add up to 40. There's a few varieties out there. Some people argue higher in the earlier years and lower in the later years, or the other way around. But let's stick with the rule of 40 for now. So if you are growing 50% per year, then basically you can keep going at a -10 profit rate, right? But when your growth starts slowing down to, let's say, 30, then you should see margins go up to about 10% and stick to that. And this typically does hold until the company has been public for quite a few years already. So I think it's all about, if you can afford growth at all costs, because you are indeed generating so much growth, investors will back you. But at some point in time, your growth starts slowing down, and that's when you already need to have some cost controls in place and being able to tweak right away.
Great answer. So by the way, this just came up, this next question, which dovetails with the conversation I had yesterday with one of our clients.
Mm-hmm.
This is, how do you transition from fake it till you make it to actually making it? And let me add context, which hopefully aligns with the question. Yesterday, I was talking to a CEO, and this CEO is very technical, loves to build features. And we were talking about, first, let's sell things.
Yeah.
Then let's deliver them 3 or 4 times. Then let's formalize how we deliver them. Then let's actually build the technology to deliver it.
Right.
Sort of antithetical, but I wonder how much that resonates with faking it to making it to actually making it, Roland.
No, I totally agree that in many cases you actually want to be out with the market offering before you actually start building it, especially building it on a scalable version. And of course, when we work with technologists and startups, scalable infrastructure is all they think about, and that's how they've been trained, right? So that's not to start with. You want to start with the market offering. I think where I see fake it till you make it go wrong is when they're primarily just focusing on faking it. So I worked with some customers who are so obsessed about getting rich and earning revenue that basically they keep selling whatever project to whatever customer and then tell their teams internally to build it. But the next week they already have a new project and they said, oh, you could drop the other one. Now I have a new one. So that's not a tech startup. That's a consulting company in the end, right? So, usually will not get rich on that basis because essentially they're only faking it, not making it. Right. And so I think as long as you see it all as part of one system and ultimately you will build what is showing repeatable traction, then that is absolutely fine.
Right. It totally makes sense. And again, we've seen this again and again and again professionally and with our clients where they build a great product, they overbuild the product. Either no one buys it or what they buy then is not the product, what they built. And you run into that challenge there versus selling slightly ahead, having the resources to deliver on that promise. So you then know how to deliver and then build the tech in order to scale that. If you don't build the tech to scale it or sell it repeatedly, you become a consulting company. If you overbuild up front and you misguess the product market fit, then you probably are not a company at all because you haven't built the go-to-market machine.
Yeah, the other pattern we've seen a few times is when there's a big visionary overselling their vision to customers, attracting great revenue, but there's just no way to build that vision. And then what you get is like a very expensive Flintstoning, as we call it, right? Where people are trying to just satisfy that customer on every possible basis because you cannot build the system or you don't know how to.
Right. Very well said. How do you get your broader team to buy into growth when many members of that team may just view that growth as more work for themselves? That comes from someone in Sydney, Australia. Hi, down under.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe they have a bit of a cultural problem where it's not the right kind of employees that they attracted. It could be that they came primarily more from like stable or corporate environments. Just speculating here, of course. But I think coming back to one of the previous questions, that often is where equity has a big role to play, especially if you can persuade people to join on the basis of possibly big equity payouts, but not necessarily big cash salaries at this point in time. It typically starts attracting those people that do want growth and want to see it happen, and that are confident in their own abilities to make that happen as well. what you want to see in a culture there is that when it's not growing fast enough, people are starting to protest in all hands meetings, like, why are we not selling more? What is going wrong? What should we do better? CEO, Jira assigned to you, bring up the share price.
Right. I love that. Great answer. Is there a diplomatic way to tell eager interns that equity doesn't pay for their lunch? I don't think I understand that question. Do you understand that question?
I don't think interns need being told that equity doesn't pay for their lunch. I think interns know that very well, right? What interns may want is both cash and equity.
Totally makes sense. And let's see, maybe
So to answer that question, the diplomatic way that startups have typically managed this is by only telling employees as well as interns how many shares they get, but they never tell them the total amount of shares outstanding or what percentage that represents. And so if a typical startup has 10 million or 100 million shares outstanding, then it sounds like, oh, I got 10,000 shares. That sounds like a lot, or 5,000, or maybe 1,000 when you're an intern. But of course, it's absolutely negligible. And that's a diplomatic way to manage that discussion.
Yes. Sorry, a question just came in, which is making me chuckle. This is from Chicago, Illinois, in the US. Is there a polite way to tell your co-founder their latest 3M idea may or may not be pure genius?
This sounds like a very typical situation because most of us have had co-founders, including you, Doug, where many of these ideas are either batshit crazy or genius, and you cannot always tell up front, right?
Well, and especially when you've heard ones that you think are crazy and turn out to be brilliant, you then second guess yourself and don't know yourself if you're just not smart enough to understand it or if it is crazy, right?
Yeah, so I think this is ultimately really startup 101 because every startup starts with batshit crazy ideas. It has to. If they were obvious, they would have happened already, right? So I think ultimately the proof is in the pudding, right? So are we seeing some traction with this? Do we see people latching onto it? Do we see employees buying into it? Ultimately, investors and customers, right? And so it's all a matter of creating a climate of experimentation where you can experiment with some of those ideas. But one thing I would definitely say to a co-founder who has spouting hundreds of those ideas is, well, which one do you want to try first? Let's not try many at a time. Let's try the one you believe most in and then see. And if you then want to try something else, then that's fine. But let's not do them all in parallel.
Yeah, one other tactical way to handle that too, which I've encouraged a couple clients to do with their CEO, and I know at a past startup when I worked for CEO, we also maybe slowed the response rates to those emails. So people have different working hours. As you know, Roland, I'm an early morning worker. I've worked with co-founding teams who work late at night. So sometimes you get into an endless email back and forth versus reading the email and not responding or typing the email and scheduling the response to go out 4 or 6 hours later. That can also maybe slow those things down in the moment. So you can then meet, get it written down, really understand, fully flesh it out, ask the right questions so it doesn't become kind of that almost customer support queue where you're constantly responding.
Yeah, and I think that if you are the kind of person who spouts these ideas the whole time, then actually being aware of, let's not just have people respond to me at any point in time, but let's give them the time to respond with a thought out proposal is a really good practice, right? So instead of just expecting everyone to be on your Slacks the whole time or email if you're still so inclined, I like the Jeff Bezos method where he would just send a question or even just a question mark to someone, and that would mean I don't need an answer right now. I need a well thought out answer that is like my 6-pager template that we can discuss in a meeting.
Right. Cool. One more question, Roland.
Sure. Yep.
How do you balance persevering to your vision versus ignoring market feedback? This is from Toronto, Canada.
Hi, Toronto. So I think the best founders can combine this in a way that almost no mortal human being can. This is essentially the very DNA of a successful founder. And I do think it requires some stubbornness around their vision, but keep that stubbornness at a very high level so that you're very flexible on implementing the tactics in 100 different ways until you're successful, right? So to give an example, if Google's original vision was to organize the world's information, that's still their original vision. But what that has turned into, and how they are going about it, has changed in myriads of ways in the meanwhile. And so I think that being able to hold on to that vision at a very high level is important. But as soon as it starts feeling like, well, it has to be exactly like this or only in this particular way, then you're going to be at risk of ignoring market feedback too much.
I agree with that. I would also just sort of add that it really depends on where you are in your journey. If you sold to, if you're scaling customers, you're getting consistent feedback that, hey, you've solved this problem over here. We also need you to solve these additional problems. As long as you can do that while staying in your core with your core customer, I would then really pay attention to that market feedback. A lot of times, Roland, we talk about when you start a company, you really need to be inside out, focused on your vision and the impact it's going to make in the world at large. And as you scale, to your point, you want to keep that as a North Star, that vision, but you then have to realize that maybe your vision isn't incorporating all of the needs of those customers. And if you don't meet all of their core needs and add a significant amount of value, then they may not be sticky, they may not renew, and you may not be able to retain them and continue to grow it. So I think it comes down to also the maturity and the amount of product market fit you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And two thoughts on that. One is that, you always say like, of course you oversell a vision, but then in the end, customers stay with you because they get real value out of the actual product that you've developed, even if that's different from your vision. So I would argue there, trying to make sure that the market feedback you're accepting is not necessarily about your vision directly. It's about the actual product or service that you are selling today, even if that falls 100% or 90% short of your vision, right? And the other thing I would say is there's always going to be aspects, to your point, Doug, that no founder is excited about, but there are still fundamental expectations. Point in case, a dashboard about your SaaS company, right? Nobody's excited about it, about building a dashboard or about building analytics, but ultimately it's what proves that the thing is being used and that they derive value from it. So as they say, every SaaS company in the end turns into a dashboard company.
Right. Unquestionably. You just need to manage everything. Let's see. Do you want to take one more, Roland?
I think one more, and then we can probably close it for today. We have another one coming up in 2 weeks from now.
Okay, perfect. Is there a way to make we're pre-revenue sound as exciting as we're cash flow positive? This is from, the Research Triangle in North Carolina.
No, short answer is no.
Well, and I think I love that. So pre-revenue is not as exciting as cash flow positive, but that does mean if you're pre-revenue, I would just question a lot of things of, are you announcing features? Are you focused on the demand generation and having conversations with prospective clients and getting your pitch and finding out what excites them? Or are you overbuilding the solution? Because you shouldn't be in pre-revenue that long, and you shouldn't really have to build that large of a solution before you become.
There's maybe one exception, which is B2C, right? So in B2C, you can be a pre-revenue for a much longer time because then the exciting part would be how many people are using your product and how much traction and growth in traction are you showing, how many recurring users are there. And that can build a base for revenue later, especially if you target an advertising business model. But I would say that's extremely high risk, and almost all these companies absolutely fail at a much higher rate than B2B companies. Also, in the current context of investment still being slow to get, I really don't think that traction is going to be as exciting as cash flow.
Completely agree with you. Awesome. Anyway, Roland, great job today. Thank you all for joining. Roland, what do you want to say to close things up?
Thank you for everyone for joining. We love doing these webinars, so keep tuning in. We are on different channels, LinkedIn, YouTube. Whenever there's a technical problem, if there is one, we'll post a link that does work. And other than that, thank you everyone for tuning in. Be in touch, book a strategy call.
Everyone have a great evening, morning, afternoon, or other time of day.